we invite you to visit Swords in 1991. This video is Swords Historical Society's contribution to Dublin's being European City of Culture. We plan, with some photographs from the Lawrence collection, to compare the swords of the turn of the century to the swords of today. Swords was originally a market town some 8 miles from the capital of Ireland, Dublin. It is in the ancient area of Fingal, which is the old name for North County Dublin, and means in Gaelic the area of the stranger. Fingal is between the rivers Tolka in Drumcondra and Delvin outside of Balbriggan in North County Dublin. The Norman influence is still to be found very much around the area, in our language, customs, and with the many fine castles and churches which are still to be found. You will see that the main street hasn't really changed in shape at all. The expansion is on the outside of the town. An expansion which has raised the population of Swords from about 1,500 to 20,000 people. It claims to be one of the fastest growing towns in Europe. Here we see evidence of the fact that Swords was a market town. Some bargaining going on there for the cows and horses on the street. And the old signpost, which is remembered by many elderly locals, had to be taken away to make room for the motor car which we see today. Of course, is the same place in 1991. To the left is Swords Town Park, which was opened by Dublin County Council some 4 years ago. It was the site of the local Great House, the home of the Taylors of Swords, an Anglo-Norman family. Travelling up the wide main street, we pass an old inn which has recently been beautifully refurbished, the Cock Tavern. Mrs. Margaret Thorpe at her door, one of the few families living on the main street, a great community activist. No doubt she's planning some other little scheme for the betterment of Swords. The Victorian dispensary was opened in 1898, a fine example of Victorian architecture, but totally inadequate for the Swords of today. The 41B bus goes to Rollastown, a village some 4 miles from Swords. We are now approaching the area where the town was founded. This is St. Columkill's well, which was blessed, of course, by St. Columkill in the year 560 AD. He blessed the well of clear water, and Swords is the Gaelic for pure or clear, and this is how the town of Swords got its name. The old schoolhouse was the junior school of the Old Borough School. Is now a thriving restaurant and is known in architectural terms as Tudor Revival, built in 1836. Here we see myself with Pauline and Miriam of the Historical Society walking along the hollow which was once the old main street of Swords. We're standing by the Ward River, which gets its name from the French La Guarde. This is the Norman influence again. There was a garrison of soldiers in the area at one time. Beautiful setting here, with the remains of St. Columkill's monastery on the hill in the background. The round tower, which was built about the year 800, and round towers were used at monastic settlements as watchtowers, where they watched out for the invader. And the square tower or Norman tower is dated to the 13th century. The old main street ran between the castle and the monastic settlement, and there were once a lot of little houses along here, now alas long gone. The area has recently been refurbished by Dublin County Council, making a nice riverside walk for anyone who cares to stroll by the river. The river is sometimes called the Pill by locals. Here we see the local community guard, Paul Corcoran, coming along on his bicycle. He prefers to do his duty the old-fashioned way and thinks he can see more from the bicycle than from the modern panda car. We are now heading down the Watery Lane, an area which has changed greatly over the years. But I think at this point I will hand you over to Miriam Arthurs, who was born and reared in the area.
As I go down this road now, it wasn't a road in the 1930s, it was just a laneway with very high hedges each side. For a mile down there was just only one cottage, but now you can see it is very built up. The Castle Farm estate, which has 200 houses, and on we go to Broadmeadow estate, which has over 300 houses. And they're there about 20 years now. That was part of our farm. Now we come to St. Finian's College, a community college with over 800 pupils. It is built about 15 years. It is a very modern college. As we go on down the road, we will see on the left-hand side a very modern bungalow. And on further down, we will see an old farmhouse built about 200 years ago. It was the House of the Longs. It was sold in the 1938 with 50 acres of land for the mere sum of £1,100. It would fetch a lot more now. As we head on down the hill, we come to my home, which was built in 1922. There were 9 children in the family, and I was the eldest. The eldest in those years always stayed at home to work in the farm. I worked with the men out in the fields. That is my home there now. Most of the land has been sold for building houses, a hotel and a factory, and there will be an equestrian centre at the end of the lane. I suppose that is progress, but I don't know if I like it or not. So that's it. That is the end of Sunnyside Broadmeadows. But the equestrian centre will be very modern. It is my nephew who owns the equestrian centre.
Well, this is really the swords of the 20th century. Here we see multinational firms like Amdahl and Ashton Tate working side by side, making hardware and software for computers. It could be said to be the Silicon Valley of Ireland. Amdahl employs some 500 people. It's an American company, as is Ashton Tate. While on the other side of the road, the multinational Motorola factory is in construction. This is another large plant in Swords, Squibb Linston, which have recently merged with the Bristol Myers Company, have been in Swords some 26 years. And there is a Squibb Linston plant near to our twinning town of Auzois-le-Ferrier in France. So we've got something in common. Olin Chemicals beside Squibbs is another chemical plant. Here we see the relics of old decency, a refurbished cottage on the green, once belonging to the Stafford family. This is Swords Shopping Centre belonging to J.C. Savage, one of the most prominent names in the business life of Swords. This was the first expansion from trading on the main street. Swords Shopping Centre, they're about 15 years, about half a mile from the main street. Some beautiful Irish wolfhounds there, out for a stroll. These are some of the many new housing estates on the outside of the town. We're now on a very new area, the Brackenstown Road. We're coming up towards the Church of St. Cronan, which is a new parish which has blossomed from St. Columkille's Church. They even have their own Lourdes there, thanks to the parish priest, Father Drummy. This is the beautiful area of Knocksedan. This plaque was unveiled this year on Easter Sunday in memory of the men of the area who fought in the 1916 Rising. We celebrate, of course, this year the 75th anniversary of the Rising, without which Ireland would not be going into Europe as a nation in its own right. travelling along the Rathbeal Road now. The 12 cottages are known as the 12 Apostles. This is certainly modern Swords, the Swords bypass with the pedestrian bridges overhead. Long gone are the horses and carts and carriages. Malahide Road and an estate known as Longlands. Coming back into Swords, the village coffee shop, which was an old cottage, now a thriving coffee shop, but has kept the original format. Facing us is one of the oldest buildings in the town, the Old Borough School, which was built in 1818 and designed by famous architect Francis Johnson, who designed the GPO in Dublin. Back to the hustle and bustle of the main street again. Hawthorne Hotel there on the left. This is Swords' newest restaurant, La Chateau, in a newly developed area of the main street called River Mall. It's under the personal supervision of John Dowd, who is an international award-winning gold medalist. And he's cooked for none other than Pope John Paul II when he visited Ireland. The old vicarage in the background was built in the 17th century and refurbished in the 18th century by a vicar called Joseph Epstein to give us the fine building we have today. There's John Dowd again, off duty today. We're going down North Street now. The building on the right is the local Arts and Crafts Centre, which was once the village forge. And the courthouse on the right, a fine building of cut stone built in 1845. The reason for the congestion of traffic on North Street today is we were filming on a Tuesday, which is court day in Swords. The oldest inn in the town, the Harp, there since the time of the stagecoaches. And on the left, the last pub, the north side of Swords, the Big Tree. This area is known as Spiddle Hill. It's where St. Finian had his leper hospital. Despite the development of the town, there's still a lot of farming going on the perimeter. So we head out towards the lush agricultural lands of Fingal, going down the Hearse Road near Donabate. And we're now approaching a farm, a fruit farm, where, depending on the season, you can pick your own apples, raspberries, strawberries, gooseberries for a price. Jones's Fruit Farm, where we will meet Eileen Jones. Eileen has a certain input into our twinning with Ozwa, because with her fluent French, she's able to interpret for us all and communicate with our friends in the French town. We're going for a little walk with Eileen, and she's going to explain to us about some of her fruit crops and how they are cultivated.
All that rubbish.
These are the little ones coming down, the new.
That'll be next year.
Next year.
Hello, Eileen.
Hello, Pauline.
How do you think the people of Boswell and Clerdy will like swords?
I think from the video that you just shot today, they will have a very good idea of the town of Swords, its surroundings, the people of Swords, and the happenings that go on in daily life in Swords. You've seen our factories, you've seen some of our old monuments, so they have a good idea of our town. But now I'd like to say a few words to them in their own language. Je vous dis bonjour à nos amis à Oswell-la-Ferrière. Vous avez vu notre vie, ses environs. J'espère que vous aimez ce que vous avez déjà vu. Maintenant, c'est l'instant, nous sommes sur ma ferme. Nous avons des fruits, nous sommes entre les framboises à cet instant. C'est donc le printemps, il fait du soleil, il fait beau. J'espère que quand vous allez en Irlande au mois de septembre, il fera aussi beau que maintenant. Nous allons vous voir au mois de mai et j'espère que vous allez aimer ce vidéo. Okay?
Well, we said goodbye to Eileen, and we're still in the agricultural land outside Swords. Some fine cows there. And this is the Broadmeadow Estuary, a fine amenity outside the town, used for sailing, and an excellent wild bird conservatory. Hundreds of people visit the estuary on Sundays to feed the swans, who enjoy it, of course. Back now to Swords Castle, which was built in the year 1200 by John Cummin, who was the first Norman Archbishop of Dublin. He chose Swords as the site for his summer palace. 3 archbishops lived here: John Cummin, Henry de Lons, and Alexander de Bickner, who in 1325 decided he was fed up living in Swords and moved to Tallaght. And the palace has been more or less a ruin ever since. The Archbishop was a very powerful man. He owned a lot of land around the area, and the palace was a fort, very hard to get into. And those boys today still seem to be having the same problem. Plans are afoot now to refurbish the castle, so hopefully we will see it in use in the near future. The Ward River still flowing away out to sea. In 1641, the Lords of the Pale rose up against the King and tried to start a parliament in Swords Castle. But they were defeated by the forces of the Crown under Sir Charles Coote, who was sent out to Dublin to quash their rebellion. This is the car park of the Pound pub, which was built on the site of the Pound, where stray animals were impounded. Miriam setting out there in her car, and this is an example of one of the fine new houses which are built on the perimeter of the town. Still, as I say, much agricultural land to be seen amidst the industrial development. We are wending our way back home now. We trust you have enjoyed travelling around Swords with us today. And we trust we've given you an idea of how the town has expanded since the turn of the century.